Hello, welcome to our lesson on rhetoric. In this lesson, we will learn what we are talking about when we discuss rhetoric. What is it exactly? Well, hopefully I will explain it to you well enough that you'll understand it a little bit better by the end of this lesson. All right, so you should have already read chapter 1 in your textbook, but I included a couple of quotes out of there that I found particularly interesting. The first one is, "Rhetoric happens all around us, every day. Rhetoric is a persuasive language act, whether accomplished by speech, written text, or images. It is the video footage of a demonstration on YouTube. It is the headlines on blog articles. It is the Declaration of Independence." I like that quote because it really shows the magnitude of what rhetoric is and where we can find it. We can find it in literally every text or mode of text out there that somebody, an author or a speaker, puts out into the world for us to consume, or for somebody to consume. The second one I liked was, "Rhetoric provides a useful framework for looking at the world as well as for evaluating and initiating communications." So this is really important, especially in discussing public writing, as you learn more about rhetoric and what rhetoric does and how it operates and how to write rhetorically and how to read rhetorically and how to research rhetorically. You'll inevitably become a better communicator with your friends, with your associates, with your teachers. You'll be a better friend to yourself as you'll understand more of what the world is feeding you. And I don't mean that in a political sense necessarily, just in general with advertisements, and yes, politicians as well, but films. It's just really important for analysis in general. And I know it's made me a better communicator overall. And also, I understand. I think I'm trying to say that I'm able to further understand and develop ideas of my own. I can exercise my own intellectual freedoms and do so on a level that I wouldn't have had I not known about the rhetorical situation and the rhetorical appeals that we will get to in the next few slides. Okay, so the last one is, "Being able to use the tools of rhetoric effectively gives you the power to control your communication, both incoming and outgoing, and to affect your environment in a positive way." Of course, that is pretty much what I was just saying, and it's very important to use it for good, right? We always want to use it for good, never for negative. It's an obvious thing. Okay. All right. So the rhetorical triangle can be looked at as the rhetorical situation. You have the writer or speaker at the top, the purpose or subject bottom right, and the audience or speakers the bottom left. And all of these form the rhetorical situation. And so when reading a text or listening to a speech or watching a movie or reading a headline on a blog post, keep in mind the three parts of the rhetorical triangle, which is writer, audience, and subject. There are many types of arguments, but ones you may be familiar with are the thesis, which is used in literature and scholarly articles and papers, the hypothesis, which is part of the scientific method and states the scientist's inference or the proposed outcome of an experiment, and a claim. So thesis and claim are very similar in this regard. A claim is a statement that proposes an idea. All of these forms of arguments are backed by evidence. And not to sound too harsh here, but if you do not have evidence, your argument isn't an argument. You have to have, it's not a legitimate argument, and it's practically useless at that point. You need to have evidence, something to credible to back up what you're saying. Next slide. All right, so Aristotle's appeals. So as consumers of public writing in various aspects on a daily basis, it is important to know that apart from the rhetorical situation, there are the Aristotelian appeals, which are ethos, pathos, and logos. Excuse me. So ethos is credibility. So the writer or author, so like you're the writer if you're writing, correct, uses their credibility to persuade their audience. So this is important because people need to understand why they should listen to you. What purpose do you have that, I guess, why do you have the authority? That's what I'm looking for. Why do you have the authority to tell your audience what you're telling them, and why should they believe you? That's how ethos works to persuade your audience. And then pathos is appealing to the emotions. So the writer leans on an emotional response to persuade. They can evoke fear, sympathy, empathy, joy, anger, etc. So this is when you're reading a text and you become suddenly overwhelmed with some sort of emotion, whether it's anger or sadness. I get that a lot, like empathy and sadness, especially in my line of work. I get a lot of joy as well. But that's a good way to appeal to your audience and to pull on their heartstrings, I guess you could say. All right, and the last one is logos, which is logic, and the writer utilizes reason and evidence to persuade their audience. So, okay, it's really important to think about incorporating all of these when you're writing, and also look for all of these when you're reading. So, for instance, ethos, if it's a doctor of botany and I am reading about why we should save a certain plant from extinction, I trust their credibility because of who they are. And then say they tell me then that this plant would cure cancer or could possibly cure cancer, and my grandmother died of cancer, for instance. She didn't, but if she did. And then I have an emotional attachment to that plant. And I am on their side, on this botanist side, right? And then for logic, you could, possibly this botanist would say, and it makes sense to keep it because it's actually, just cheaper to leave it alone than it would be to tear it all down and, build a shopping mall or whatever. But it's applying some sort of reason and an evident persuasion method. All right, so let's recap. I know that was crazy and I went in all sorts of directions, but I hope you kind of understand at least the basics of what rhetoric is. We're going to be talking about it all semester, so don't worry. I will fill your ear holes with much more of this rambling information that is so very important. Okay, so let's recap. Rhetoric is all around us, literally. Look to your left. I see a journal. I see a candle that tells me all sorts of things on the outside of it. If I look to my right, I see Blade Runner. I see a little stuffed animal, Boo from Nintendo, Mario. All sorts of things. I'm surrounding myself with rhetoric constantly, and so are you. Okay, understanding rhetoric gives us the tools to interpret and analyze language. The rhetorical triangle includes writer-speaker, purpose or subject, and reader or audience, which is also considered the rhetorical situation. And every argument has either a thesis, hypothesis, or claim backed up by evidence. Then Aristotle's three appeals are ethos, which is credibility, pathos, which is emotion, and logos, which is logic. All right, now that you know what rhetoric is, we will learn how to identify the writer, purpose, audience, ethos, pathos, and logos in a text. So buckle up.